Hey, Christy from Flip City Magazine. Normally, Flip City is busy mocking and ridiculing the control establishment, but we do also like to find time to sit down with serious freedom fighters. And in volume 18 of Flip City, we sat down with the wonderful and well spoken James Corbett. We were so honored to have him do an interview with us, and it will be published inside volume 18 along with illustrations by Flip City's Dangerous Dave McDowell. But for now, let's enjoy the video version of the interview we had with James, and you'll see a couple of illustrations by Dave to get it all. See it inside volume 18 of Flip City Magazine, and you can get that at flipcitymag.com. Now off to the interview.
Well, James Corbett is a friend of ours and a voice of reason in history's shitstorm, providing news coverage and insightful analysis for political dissidents, malcontents, and thought criminals everywhere on his programs, The Corbett Report and on New World Next Week since 2007. We've got some questions for Corbett. Welcome, James Corbett.
Hello, good to be here.
Thank you. So, James, what's the essence of open source journalism?
The essence of open source journalism, actually, the term open source intelligence comes from the intelligence spook world. So CIA is openly talks about the fact that most of the intelligence that they get, the most in terms of volume, as well as some of the most important information they get, is not from snooping around like James Bond. It's not from some secret underwire tap of some internet line or something. It's from what is openly published and openly acknowledged. There is so much information out there that is widely available that they have an entire open source intelligence division at the CIA that is just looking at Russian newspapers and Chinese television broadcasts and what have you, just to get information that way. And I remember reading about that in 2006 and thinking, well, if the CIA can do that, then anyone can do that, right? So that became the tagline of the Corbett Report: open source intelligence news. The open source part is obviously the fact that in open source journalism, you cite your sources, but the open source intelligence is that all the information is out there. You've just got to kind of collect it all together.
Mm-hmm. Well, your programs run on your website, corbettreport.com, and across alt media, Rumble, etc. What offense got you kicked off of YouTube?
Oh, the thought crime of talking about the philosophy of science. I mean, I guess it was a number of things, and that was just the third strike after numerous warnings and takedowns and blah, blah, blah. But of course, talking about anything to do with any of the craziness of the COVID era basically was enough to get you kicked off of YouTube. And so I had a number of whatever thought crimes that I got put in the dog cage for. And I made the conscious decision, I'm going down with this ship. I thought about maybe I should just stop posting to YouTube, just tell people to go to the other platforms. But I thought, no, let's push it to where it's going to go, and everyone can watch it happen in real time. And people will know that I'm not lying when I've been talking for years and years and years and years. I'm going to be kicked off YouTube. This is going to happen. A lot of people thought I was joking about that or it was hyperbole. No, it's going to happen. So I kept doing it. And the final straw that broke the camel's back was literally a podcast on the philosophy of science, where I was doing such amazing, unbelievable things as, talking about Karl Popper and things like this. But you're not allowed to even mention questioning the science in this era. So that was what did it.
Right. Aren't you gobsmacked about the progressives' defense of war, the domino theory, their support for war with depleted uranium, which was a huge issue 20 years ago, and so many more things?
Yeah, gobsmacked. In a sense, yes, but actually decreasingly so, because one thing that I've learned over the 16 years I've been doing this now is that very few people actually are really principled in their beliefs. Most people just want to be in position of power, and when they are, then anything that happens is fine, and it's just a team sport. So unfortunately, I am increasingly cynical. I used to believe that people actually were, for example, anti-war, and they actually cared about these things. But now I know, no, most people are just playing a team sport.
Yeah. The establishment seems to be mainstreaming all of the worst, most sociopathic authoritarian urges. Support for shutting down farms, your forced vaccinations, your censorship and information control, imprisoning political adversaries, including today, we got the Pentagon leaker Jack Teixeira was promptly arrested for leaking documents about U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine. Support for climate control agenda, including things like dimming the sun, and of course all the predatory stuff with school kids. What's going on?
Fundamentally, absolutely at the bottom of this is an anti-human agenda. And that anti-human agenda is manifesting as, well, it's taking the cover of the Malthusian, oh no, there's too many people, not enough food, blah, blah, blah. So, and whatever form that takes in the current era, climate change, whatever the banner they have to wave. But at base, it's anti-human. And it is a small clique, an incredibly small clique of truly psychopathic people who absolutely see the average person, you and me and everyone else who's listening to us right now, as just pawns on a chessboard to be managed. And at precisely the point at which the pawns are not necessary for them to play their game anymore, we will be eradicated and eliminated. And this sounds crazy, oh my God. But for people who haven't studied the depopulation agenda, the anti-human, Malthusian, eugenics idea of we are just useless eaters, and that term has been bandied about for a long time, and I think people haven't yet wrapped their mind around the fact that when they say that, they mean it literally. They think we are useless eaters, and they are going, the worst part to me, okay, all right, there's a psychopathic predatory clique at the top in positions of power. That's pretty unnerving. But what's even more unnerving to me is that they can use narrative control through media and education, miseducation, and everything else to get people to actually desire this. Yeah, there are too many people. Oh, yeah. Oh, we are hurting the planet. We got to get rid of more. We shouldn't have children anymore. We should all just live in our little hovel and die nicely. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me that people can be conditioned into desiring that. But here we are.
Yeah. You describe and champion the idea of voluntarism, living free from the coercion, especially coercion of government, and living only with human consent. Is this a long due rebranding of the scary sounding anarchism?
It's certainly a flavor of anarchism, and I think again, you're right. That's a scary sounding word. Oh my God. Oh, what? You must be a bomb throwing beard maniac or something. But it is simply and truly nothing more than the extension of the most basic moral principles that we learn in kindergarten, and extending that out to the world at large. Yeah, you can't hit other people and use force to take things from them. You can't make them other people do what you want them to do. You can convince people to do what you want them to do, but that's it. That's all, the only thing you can do. People are independent, free, sovereign individuals who get to choose what they do with their lives as long as they're not interfering with other people's lives. But suddenly, when you grow up and you enter the real world, suddenly there are people with special titles and special badges and special hats who can do various things that you can't do, but they can do because a bunch of people got together and wrote some name on a piece of paper or something, whatever magical incantation. It's just stripping away that supernatural hocus pocus that's been drilled into our heads since the time we were born, that there is some special class of human beings who get to make the rules for everyone else because of whatever magic ritual took place, and saying, no, all relations between adult human beings have to be consensual. And when you put it in those terms, of course, I mean, that's even the buzz terms of this era that we're in, right? Oh, it's, consent is sexy and all of that. Well, okay, let's extend that out to the political field. Can we do that? I'd like to think we can.
Yeah. Well, you put out a documentary called Media Matrix. This covers communications from Gutenberg and the press in the 1500s to up to the metaverse now, and how emerging technologies are hijacked routinely by big interests to broadcast their messages and control. Wouldn't you say tech is a double-edged sword, and there's a battle for control between these forces of control and freedom?
Absolutely. I mean, technology is incredibly powerful. And of course, that is why people in positions of power are very concerned about how that power is used and how it could be used by free humanity to do all of the things that humanity wants to do in order to flourish, or it can be used to control humanity. And the Gutenberg printing press is a prime example of that. It is one of the most powerful technologies ever invented by humanity. Suddenly we went from a mostly illiterate society where books themselves were incredibly rare and valuable possessions to a society where information was able to widely spread. And it took a while, I think, for the power, the status quo power elite to figure out how best to subdue that weapon. And of course, the initial inclination of the kings and tyrants of that era was to simply censor the press and control the press. And so you had various licensing acts in Britain and elsewhere. In order to publish, you had to have a special grant of privilege from the government and blah, blah, blah. But that didn't work so well. It did work at times in different places for periods of time, but information will generally get out. So the most effective thing that was eventually discovered was, hey, as the technology becomes more and more complex and more capital intensive, it's going to take more and more resources in order to have access to this incredible technology. So we're just going to basically be the bottleneck, the gatekeepers. We're going to put the man in the middle between this information and the general public. And that worked exceptionally well throughout the 20th century in the time of mass media consolidation down to a few corporations controlling almost everything that almost everyone was hearing, seeing, and talking about on a daily basis. What an incredible system of control, until the internet comes along and blows the doors off of that once again. And so now what we are seeing is the decades long, but sure and perhaps inevitable, seemingly inevitable progress back towards that 20th century media paradigm of consolidation of control in fewer and fewer hands. Again, similarly, because the bottleneck of, in this case, infrastructural technological developments, the Cloudflares and the CDNs, the content distribution networks, and all of these sorts of things that require, again, a lot of resources are going to be the bottlenecks as people start to, well, maybe they never knew what the internet was actually about and the decentralization of information that it made possible. As everyone flows back into the centralized paradigm, information is not only going to be as controlled as it was in the 20th century, but even more controlled, really. And we really are getting into the Orwell memory hole situation of everything digitized means absolutely everything malleable, and things can be disappeared with a flick of a switch in ways that are truly horrifying. So that's the bad side of it. But the good side, yes, I mean, this technology is powerful. The reason that the power structure is fighting against disinformation, malinformation, misinformation so hard, the reason they are censoring so hard is because this is incredibly powerful information and technology for distributing that information that could absolutely, and has, I mean, the fact that you and me, we are talking here in this conversation at all is a miracle that we should not take for granted. I would never have met you in any other era of human history, but here we are exchanging ideas and having this conversation. That is anathema to the power structure. You cannot let these people connect and find each other and spread information. So that's the battle that we're in. And the good side is, if people are aware of that and understand the power of this technology and the power of decentralized information, there are many ways to start decentralizing instead of centralizing on the YouTubes and Facebooks of the world. There's many, 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 many ideas out there for how to get around those structures, but we have to be aware of them, and we have to be aware of why it's important to do that.
Yeah. Well, you also mentioned in your documentary that colonial America had a 90% literacy rate. And now today we have schools that don't even require literacy to graduate. Literacy, reason, logical math standards are dropped or marginalized as racist. We have a literacy problem, so we have a great divide and a communication breakdown. Is basic literacy being spiked as a means of control?
Absolutely. So Charlotte Iserbyt and John Taylor Gatto and others have documented this specifically in the American schooling system, but really the schooling system around the world based on the Prussian education model that itself was a concerted governmental attempt in the 18th century, late 18th century, to start engineering society to essentially make a better class of soldiers to die in the fields for the greater glory of the nation. So so many of the concepts of schooling that we now take completely for granted were really established in that Prussian education model that was then shipped out through the globe, including the United States, including definitely here where I am in Japan, where the kids still wear the military-looking style uniforms and march in single file order and everything. It's creepy to look at, but it does give you the sense that, yes, of course, the schooling system as we know it, was invented to essentially make better soldiers. And then eventually that got adopted in the Industrial Revolution to, well, we want to make better factory workers. And we're still essentially on that model. So yes, dumbing down and drilling obedience, blind, willless obedience into children has been part of the system for a very long time. And now we're seeing the plug pulled on even the bare basics of reading, writing, arithmetic, which is going to send society completely down the hole. And there's no way that this can be. I'm not a coincidence theorist anyway. I think that this is part of a planned and coordinated agenda. In times past, they at least wanted the factory workers to be able to add and read and do basic tasks and think critically enough that they're not going to get themselves killed in the factory floor or something. But for the coming AI, robot, whatever era that we're stepping into, hey, do we need these workers at all? Maybe we just need them to be just absolutely dumbed down enough that they will accept whatever rationed beyond meat garbage we're trying to shove down their throats until they die. At any rate, I think, again, part of the anti-human depopulation agenda.
Yeah. Isn't the death of the Western intellect a spectacle to behold?
I think one of the most remarkable things about that is, for example, when you cite the 90% literacy rate in colonial America, the reason that was so important was because it was a pamphlet, a political pamphlet like Common Sense by Thomas Paine, that truly, in a real sense, ignited what the American Revolution really became a revolution at the publication of Common Sense. Because here's just some political tract that most people today wouldn't even bother to read and probably couldn't read or couldn't understand, that sparked such a fire in the minds of men and women and completely changed their conception of what was happening. This wasn't some civil war against the king. We're just trying to get our rights as loyal subjects of the king. No, we are in a revolution. And that mindset flip happened because this incredible, this political tract became this incredible bestseller. And I forget the numbers, but if you put it in today's numbers, added up in all time, it would be something like the 17th best-selling book of all time in the United States or something like that. Anyway, an incredible number of people read it. And what would be the equivalent of that today? I guess a very viral TikTok video. Are you going to have Common Sense in a 2-minute, TikTok video? Hey, while I'm dancing, let me teach you about what's happening. I mean, the discourse has been dumbed down to such a level that I hate to bring this up because it's the reference that's made every time, but it's Orwell. It's 1984. It is duck speak. If they can keep dumbing us down to the point where we can barely read, barely articulate a sentence, then how are we possibly going to even understand the situation we're in, let alone articulate valid and productive solutions to that? And you can see this, you can hear this with your own ears if you go back and listen to public discourse from 50 years ago, and people speaking in complete multiclausal sentences, constructing ideas in paragraphs that lead from one idea to the next and make a grand statement. And now we're literally living in the TikTok era. And who was it that I was just hearing? I can't remember, but I was just hearing about someone who had been invited on to some program on CNN or one of those networks and was told before he went on, oh yeah, we can't let anyone speak for longer than 15 seconds because research shows people will tune out if anyone speaks for longer than 15 seconds. I mean, literally, they will not let you speak for more than 15 seconds at a time. How long have I just been speaking just to articulate this one point? I mean, it's a travesty. It truly is a travesty, and even beyond the sort of, oh my God, we're going to lose art and culture. The idea that we can even contemplate, think, and articulate our situation is absolutely the basis to having any sort of freedom. The way to strip freedom from people is to stop them from being able to think about their situation.
Yeah. Well, I feel sometimes that we're very close to being in that place where we're living in the shadow of our past civilization, where we live in the cities with the buildings, for instance, but wouldn't have any idea how to build them. We have systems, but no idea how to create them or maintain them, and are just going downhill from there. Yeah. In your documentary Media Matrix, I think one of the most disturbing things you showed was the metaverse display. I'm not sure where you sourced that. It was in Spanish. And I understand educational applications to the metaverse. For instance, you're going to go to a dinosaur park or the sea, and you're going to learn things about this. Okay, you get some information, but a grocery store scenario, I don't quite get it. So you're gonna be in the metaverse, and you're gonna buy groceries in the metaverse, and then what? Are you gonna take them to your metaverse home and cook them, and then digitally eat them?
Well, think about going to yourself 20 years ago and trying to explain, no, you're going to carry a phone everywhere all the time. And yeah, I mean, it's not a phone. I mean, you're going to be browsing TikTok and Facebook and all these things while you're walking around and doing things. And 20 years ago, I don't know, if you were trying to explain that to me, I'd be like, well, really? Or you really think people are going to do that? Here we are. It didn't take very long at all. So yes, as augmented reality starts to become, I mean, clearly, they haven't cracked the code yet on how to get people to get their foot in that door. No one's putting on the Google glasses or whatever they were trying to roll out a few years ago. Facebook's Meta is now a literal punchline. So they haven't cracked that code. But once they do, and once you start being able to like scroll your Twitter feed while you're shopping or whatever, it'll be something innocuous at first, but as it starts to take more and more hold, people will suddenly find they can't live without it. And you mentioned that visualization, and I believe it was called hyper reality. It was a visualization done by some sort of 3D animator kind of person who was trying to envision the future of this augmented reality. And the most disturbing part of that, by far for me, is that if you really concentrate on that video, make it a full screen thing so you're not looking at 7 windows, look at that video and immerse yourself in it, maybe in a dark room, and just sit there. And it's a horrible experience for the first few minutes as all of this crap is all over the screen and all of this buzzing and music and things and people talking and all of this craziness. But after a while, you start to get used to it. And you start to be able to process, okay, yeah, this person is walking through the supermarket and they're advertising all this stuff. And then when it has that glitch and the screen drops out and you're down back in actual reality of just people walking around in a supermarket, you start to feel that kind of like, ooh, where'd all that stuff go? Where'd the music go? What happened to the people telling me things and the cute cartoon characters dancing across my field of vision? You get used to it, even just within a few minutes, to the point where you notice, oh, reality is kind of boring, isn't it? And that to me is the scariest part of this, is however baffling it may seem to us at this stage, where we can't even comprehend why would people do this, once people get used to it, they will think, why on earth did people live in this boring reality before? Man, there's just nothing going on. It's just so boring. I want all this stuff on my screen. And that to me is by far the scariest part. Again, it's like people desiring the anti-human depopulation agenda, desiring their own death. It's people desiring this hyper reality is going to be the downfall. We can choose, theoretically, we can choose to get off this train at any time, but are we going to make that decision? And do we trust ourselves to make that decision?
Yeah. Well, it gets people so addicted to the stimulation and the dopamine hits of things constantly happening. With that in mind, do you try to consciously limit your time and get away from electronic media?
I absolutely do. And I have made even more of a conscious effort since making that Media Matrix series and really immersing myself in that material to read more physical books and less digital books. Yeah. And I spend a lot less time watching videos online than I used to. I used to get a lot of information that way. These days, I find it decreasingly valuable for me. I would much rather actually open a book. But even then, I mean, a book is just a sort of more primitive form of media technology. This is the thing. There's no, I mean, unless you literally just go out in the woods and never look at a book or listen to a radio show again, I mean, at some point, you're going to be consuming media. But it has to be done consciously with a conscious understanding of that. And it is harder and harder to maintain that conscious understanding of the unreality of media as the media becomes more and more invasive, more and more pervasive, more and more authentic, audiovisual. I mean, when you're just reading a book, you know you're reading a book. But when you've got the things beeping and buzzing all around you and the distractions on the screen, you start to forget about the blurring of the line between reality and the metaverse or whatever it is. So that's my concern, is that the technology is going to make it more and more essentially so that there is no line. They're going to completely efface the line between reality and media so that we're steeped in both. And by far the most disturbing statistic that I've encountered recently was, and I always forget the specific number, I should really commit this to memory, but it was something like the average American now spends 14 hours a day in mediated reality of some sort. And which sounds like that's impossible. Are you even, and I guess, yeah, you're awake 14 hours a day, but like really just constantly? But yeah, of course, people aren't walking around with books in their face, but they're walking around with earphones in their ears. They're walking around with their phone. They're walking around looking at their iPad or playing their Switch or sitting in front of a TV. Yeah, I guess I can believe it. Yeah, probably 14 hours a day at this point in mediated reality. How much time are we spending in actual real reality with just person to person talking with no electronic gadgets distracting us?
Yeah,
it's a decreasingly common occurrence these days.
James, you're originally from Alberta, Canada, but you're based in Japan, making you a Canadian expatriate. What inspired you to make this move?
I was young, wanted to see the world. There was no political aspect to this whatsoever. I had no particular interest in Japan. I'm not a weeb. I was not into anime or video games or what have you. I had no Japanese training or anything. I just really wanted to, I needed to pay back my student loan from going to Trinity College in Dublin. And I wanted to see some other part of the world. So I thought, oh, okay, teaching English, they're going to pay me to speak my native language and I don't even have to be a real teacher. Hey, sure. Sounds like a fun way to spend a year. So I spent a year doing that and then realized, you know what? I like it over here. So I'm going to stay. And that was, 18 years ago?
So do you tune in to Japanese news and affairs at all? Because it occurs to me that you could live there and screen all of that out and just tune into Western news and media.
It's true. Yeah, I do think about this because, of course, I came 2004-ish, clearly in the internet era. And sometimes I think, even if I'd moved here 10 years before, it would have been a much different experience because now, of course, I can connect with people all around the world. I can listen to, I can watch the CBC if I want to, which I don't. But, of course, I have complete access to any media anywhere. So it is a different experience. Of course, I do see Japanese news and Japanese TV and what have you, but I don't spend a lot of time with it. I certainly don't care about it. So it is an increasingly, it's part of the homogenization of culture around the world. Wherever you are could be like back home at this point, because you have access to it, because most of the experience you have back at home is virtual anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, The Japanese young people's love of Western culture is often expressed itself in a kind of pop fanaticism, whether it's hot dogs eating contests or along video game binges. I seem to remember maybe kids in Japan playing a video game for a week straight and dropping dead or something like that. What's the worst social youth trend in Japan right now?
Well, it's funny you say the Western culture love, which it absolutely has been here for a long time, which is interesting when you think about it. I mean, how many countries are going to suddenly start absolutely loving and desiring to become the country that dropped nukes on them? Well, anyway, that's Japan. But recently, it isn't Western culture so much. Like now, it's K-pop, and people are looking to Korea. And I have a friend whose daughters are now starting to learn Korean because they love Korea so much, and they want to. So there's changes taking place with regards to that. Anyway, I would take anything you read about the Japanese youth culture trend with a gigantic grain of salt, because it is just some writer who saw someone doing something once and now wants, hey, that's something I can write about. So I remember several years ago, there was some stupid article that went through the American newswires about like the latest trend amongst youth in Japan, licking eyeballs. Like, really? I don't see a lot of that out there. I don't know where they got that from. So I don't know. And plus, I'm an old fuddy-duddy now. How connected am I with what's really happening amongst the youth? But anyway, the general overall societal trend towards marrying later, if at all, the fewer and fewer people that want children in the first place, and when they, even if they don't have the money to have children and blah blah blah. It's maybe the same struggles as people are facing in a lot of different places in the world, but amplified here. And so we're seeing the Japanese population dropping year after year. Just dropped under 125 million, I think. So heading off that demographic cliff, and that to me is, whatever pop cultural sort of thing is going on here, but that to me is the really scary part of this.
Yeah. Well, are these kids in Asia as nihilistic as kids in the West have become?
Some of them, sure. How do you generalize about that? There's a word here in Japan for shut-ins, essentially, which is a type of subculture, and it's not a huge number, but there are people who literally just kind of shut themselves off, don't go to school, don't do anything, just literally live in their room and are fed and enabled by their parents, I guess. If there's a word for it, it's at least somewhat of a significant trend. So there are definitely people like that. In some ways, I would say there's a naivete or an innocence, as it were, in Japanese culture at any rate, that it's less cynical overall, I would say, than in the West. But I wouldn't say it's a happy outlook. And I think today's Japanese youth understand that they're growing up in such a different world than their parents' or grandparents' generation. But strangely, Japan hasn't quite gotten rid of the vestiges of the old system, whereby when you study hard, you get into a good university. Once you get into the university, you've already graduated, essentially. It's just who cares? But then your goal is to get into a good company. And once you're in the good company, you're there for life. And that was the system that worked for their parents and their grandparents. And as long as people can remember, that was the system. And that's clearly breaking down. And more is kind of part-time work and contract work, and who can get a good job that's going to last even a decade, let alone the rest of your life. But still, I think the mindset is the same. So that transition hasn't happened yet. And people, it's going to be very, 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 very different as the demographic wave hits in Japan, especially hard. More and more 100-plus-year-olds, let alone 90-year-olds, 80-year-olds, 70-year-olds that are going to be supported by fewer and fewer actual workers. It's a demographic crisis of nightmarish proportions that I think the young people in Japan probably understand that pretty well.
Do you think as the West has abandoned these principles of freedom that the Japanese and Asians youth's love affair with the West is starting to wane a little bit?
Maybe that's part of it. I don't know if it's so much ideological, but anyway, it is waning. And what does that mean? What does that mean long term? I have often said that once Once you see Japan starting to go out from under the US umbrella and towards China, that's where everything changes, at least in the Asia Pacific region. And that sounds, I mean, it still sounds pretty outlandish. That'll never happen. But extend things out a decade or two, and who knows? So yeah, there's definitely a huge change happening. And yes, what other countries and civilizations have that freedom as the sort of historical precedent and the background and the philosophical context for it? That was specifically, it was an English idea that came out of the English, that got transplanted obviously to America and flowered there. That doesn't exist in Chinese society. That doesn't exist historically in Japanese society. It's not about freedom and individual liberty. That context, John Locke and all of those philosophers, that doesn't exist in that tradition. It is more about social harmony and living, under the thumb of an emperor for a long period of history. And there was never, I mean, still, Japan still has the emperor, right? And some people literally still believe it is, that's a literal god on earth. So it's a very, very different mindset. And as China grows in influence, and as that authoritarian system grows in geopolitical clout, that is going to mean the potential for the extinguishing of that idea of human freedom. I don't think that idea will ever fully leave the planet until the last human being is eradicated from the planet. But hey, we're getting towards the changing of humanity down to the genomic level and everything else. I mean, the end of humanity is a real possibility at this point. And I don't even mean some vast nuclear war. I mean, changing what it means to be human. At any rate, yeah, this is the game for all the marbles. This is the most important time in human history.
Well, James, you also host the program New World Next Week with our friend James Evan Pilato of Media Monarchy. How did you two get together?
Good question. I did a podcast way back, 2007 or 2008, where I played a clip from Dark Winter, which was the simulation of a smallpox terrorist event in the US that happened in June of 2001. Shortly before 9/11 and shortly before the anthrax attacks. And James had been hosting the videos. They made some fake news segments for playing in that simulation that then got released to the public years later. James was hosting some of those on his YouTube channel at the time. So I played some of those clips on my podcast, and I guess he heard that and saw that I was linking to him. So he sent me an email just to say, hey, thanks for playing clips, blah, blah, blah. I got a podcast, check it out. So I started listening to him, and I'd listen to all sorts of, college radio news things and whatever. I cast my net widely. And a lot of them were not that informative, not that great. But with James, with Media Monarchy, I found, every week there was all sorts of stories that I hadn't caught. And he had all sorts of stuff. And he provided all the links and everything, which was really handy for me. So I started becoming a regular listener. I started inviting me on the Corbett Report. He invited me on Media Monarchy. We talked a bunch of times. And eventually we got the idea, we should do some sort of, like, videos popping these days. It was the 2009. Like, we should do a video series, like a news series. And that became New World Next Week. And hey, it's been, 14 years now? That's crazy.
Yeah. It's bonkers, as James would say. It's bonkers. You offer a regular segment called Solutions Watch, featuring people being constructive. You even featured Flip City in your Solutions Watch broadcast last year, and thanks again for that. And we do publish print, art, and articles year-round, but we would much rather be indiscriminately consuming mainstream corporate mush and whining about why it sucks. So why do you insist on providing solutions to the world's problems when you could be complaining?
It's a good question, because complaining would be a lot more profitable and popular an idea for me. This is the big funny thing that people don't understand, is that, of course, I'll get emails from people like, oh, why do you only talk about the bad things? And, oh, you're just trying to spread fear and whatever. But I know that's what most people want. People do not tune in to watch things online because they just want to learn how to improve their lives. That involves, actual work and like doing things. No. I just want to complain. I just want to. So it's the funny thing. It would be so much more popular if I just, hey, what's trending in the the news wires this week, I'll just make a short little video about that. It would be so much easier for me and so much more popular. But no, why do I do what I do? Partly, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. But partially, at the very least, I'm not just spreading information so people can be better aware of, oh yeah, there's psychopathic, depopulation agenda anti-humans at the top who want to kill you. Okay, bye-bye. I don't think that's very helpful to anyone. No, I'm doing this because I genuinely believe, I believe what I said earlier. We are at the most important point in human history, and things really, truly could go either way. I don't think they'll ever go completely for the good for all time. Oh, okay, no more problems, no more evil on the planet. I can't envision that. But I certainly could envision things going dark in a really, really cataclysmic way. As I say, changing what it means to be human on some fundamental level. I think we still have a chance to avert that at any rate, or at the very least, delay that. And so I am interested in things that people can do with this information. And also partially, this is just from my own perspective. I've been talking about this stuff for 16 years now. Documenting another way that we're being lied to, or another thing that the media is misrepresenting. Yay, woo. It's not even interesting to me at this point. No, what is much more interesting are the people who are out there doing things in the real world, attempting to make things change, make something happen. I don't know how this ends up, and I don't know if we win in the end, but at any rate, I know that we definitely lose if we don't try something. So I'm just trying to motivate people to see that, and also to model the idea of having conversations about solutions rather than conversations about problems. Because, as I say, there's no end to programs out there in the alt media world that are just talking about problems, just problem. There are not a lot of, I can't think of very many that are devoted to talking about solutions and just how do we approach this and what do we talk about, to the point where I find that a lot of my audience has some interesting ideas about what that word even means, solution and things. And I'll sometimes get some of the commentary at saying, that's not going to solve everything. Your grandchildren's grandchildren might have to deal with a problem someday. Yeah. What do you think the word solution means? Like, what are you going for there? Anyway, so I just want to open up the conversation, if nothing else, just on the concept. What is solution, and what can we do to improve the world? And do we have to completely solve all the problem of evil for all time in order to go forward, or can we just take a little step here and there?
Yeah. Well, we love you, James, because you come off as a calm voice of reason in an insane world of vaccinated food and digital currency. How do you keep from freaking out? Are you a meditative sort of guy?
Not in any sort of mystical sense. But these guitars behind me are not just for show. I like music. I like playing around. It's a good distraction at any rate.
This is my last question for you, James. Where does artificial intelligence rank on your scale of horrors?
I'm not even going to quibble about, well, artificial intelligence is not really intelligent, blah, 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 because I know that is the sort of stuck on stupid version of the conversation that people get into. No, it is a real threat, and the threat is perhaps not the one that most people understand it to be, but at any rate, to me, the really disturbing part is that how quickly it is, all of the media attention of this subject has become like, AI says this. And the implication is, therefore, it's real. Like, the AI said it, guys. It's already being treated like some kind of oracle. Anyway, yeah, there is a real danger there. And as I tried to write in a recent editorial on the real problem of the AI takeover, or I can't remember what I called the chatbot takeover. In that article, I was trying to stress that I think one of them, well, there's a couple of really disturbing things about this. One is that people, once again, are willfully, gleefully giving up their own data and information, feeding it into this beast, and like, oh, I'll use OpenAI and I'll tell it everything I know and ask it everything I think. That's giving it the would-be controllers as much information about you as they could ever possibly desire, which probably isn't a good thing. But also, I think the real risk is, did you ever see the movie Her? I think it was called Her, right? It was a Spike Jonze directed movie from several years ago, where this guy falls in love, has a relationship with his operating system, which of course is like an AI chatbot kind of thing that's constantly in his ear because it's the near future, and basically, you know, there's augmented reality of various sorts, and so he's constantly interacting with this operating system, which is he starts to feel this as a human, and he starts to fall in love with her, and blah blah blah. And it takes a weird turn. It's a Spike Jonze, so of course it's a weird and interesting movie. But that is, I think, more where we are heading towards, where people start to truly believe in this and start to interact with it and start to inject personhood into these bits and bytes. And that will be the most effective form of enslavement. I've always thought that it's kind of stupid for would-be controllers to do these spectacular 9/11 types of things and things that will wake people up all of a sudden. Just lead them a bit by bit by bit into the nice, pillowy, cushiony cocoon of the metaverse, whatever, GMO synthetic reality that they're trying to construct around us, and most people will go along with it. And that's another example. I'm noticing in this conversation, it keeps coming down to what I'm really afraid of is not they, them, those doing things to us. It is us desiring the things that they, them, those are doing to us.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well put. Well, go and watch James' video at CorbettReport.com and read all the articles. And thank you, James, for this discussion. We appreciate it.
I appreciate what you guys are doing. Thank you for having me.
Right. Thanks again so much, James, for the interview. You can find all James' work at CorbettReport.com. And if you'd like to see this entire interview along with all the illustrations, you would go to FlipCityMag.com and purchase volume 18. And of course, if you like things like this, comment, like, subscribe. Thanks. Bye.